Hi, today we are going to explain the storyline of a movie called Next, which was released back in 2007. Alright, so let's get straight to the storyline. One day, a man named Chris was sitting in a restaurant waiting for someone. He kept looking at his watch as if he knew exactly when the person he was waiting for would come. However, when the person did not come, he was disappointed. When night fell, Chris went to a place to work. He apparently was a magician with the stage name Cadillac, who always put on a show about his accuracy in predicting what would happen. When Chris was performing, that night there were two FBI agents who were in the audience. One of them was named Ferris, and apparently the two of them had not come to enjoy the show, but to spy on Chris. Chris seemed to be able to see the future. He was able to see 2 minutes ahead, but couldn't get any farther than that. Other than that, all he could see was his own future, or the future that he was involved in. Because of his ability, Chris understood that if we saw the future, then the future would change. Thanks to this ability, Chris could not only use it to perform, but he also often went to gambling establishments. At that place, Chris used his abilities so he could get the desired result, but he never stood out and always played it safe. Because he was always present at gambling venues and always got lucky results, casino officials also paid attention to him from the CCTV monitors. One of them was Roybal, who was the head of security at the casino. Roybal and the other officers knew that Chris was always lucky and they suspected him of cheating. Roybal then ordered his men to arrest Chris, but Chris, who could see his future, immediately left the gambling table. Chris then went to the female officer to withdraw his gambling proceeds. At that time a man came, and Chris saw the future that the man would rob the casino. The man was about to pull out a gun and shoot 2 people. Before that happened, Chris pushed him down to the floor and grabbed his gun, but the casino security guard came and accused Chris of wanting to commit a crime. Chris then tried to explain, but the security guard didn't care. Finally, Chris ran away by using his ability to trick the officers. After Chris managed to get out of the casino, he stole a car and took it to his residence. At the same time, Ferris, who had watched Chris's show, was watching the recording when Chris grabbed a gun at the casino. She then spoke to her superiors that they needed Chris, because Chris could know what would happen. Apparently, they were having a dangerous case, where there was a nuke smuggled to America and it was about to be detonated. They had to find the nuke quickly, and her superiors thought Ferris's proposal was so absurd because she only saw Chris as an unreliable magician. Even so, Ferris seemed adamant.
5 days, Kelly.
After that, Ferris and her crew called Roybal, the head of the casino security, to meet him. Ferris then asked about Chris and found out how Chris worked by seeing the future. Meanwhile, Chris, who had run away from the casino, had now returned home. Shortly thereafter, he realized that the police were coming to his place, but Chris did not immediately run away because he wanted to know what the police wanted. Ferris then came in and started talking to Chris. She admitted that she already knew about Chris's ability to see the future and needed Chris's ability to find the location of the nuclear bomb that would be detonated. Ferris also said that if Chris refused, the nuke would explode and 8 million lives would perish. In addition, Chris would be put in jail. After hearing all that, apparently Chris still refused. Suddenly, the police came and surrounded him. Chris looked surprised by the siege, but it turned out that it was all just the future he saw. Chris finally left there before Ferris managed to find him. At the same time, Roybal, who was about to enter his car, was approached by 2 people disguised as police. The 2 people asked what he knew about Chris, but Roybal did not want to tell him. Suddenly, Roybal was shot in the leg and they again extracted information from him. The next day, Chris, who was on the run, instead returned to the restaurant he usually visited to wait for a woman. This time the woman really came and made Chris amazed when he first saw her. The woman's name was Liz and she sat not far from where Chris was. Chris then immediately saw the future and tried all ways to approach Liz, but everything always failed. Not long after, a man named Kendall came to meet Liz. He acted rudely to Liz and Chris then returned to see the future. According to the future he saw, Chris wouldn't be able to get close to Liz if he instead beat that guy. Finally, Chris allowed himself to be beaten up. Liz was shocked and angry at Kendall. Liz then kicked him out and helped Chris, who was in pain. After that, Chris made up a story that he was heading to a city to be with Liz, and Liz finally asked Chris to go with him. Not long after, they left in Liz's car. Sometime after they left, Ferris and his men came and asked about Chris to the restaurant employees. They then told Ferris the information about Chris that they knew. After leaving the restaurant, Ferris checked the existing CCTV to track down Chris. At that time, Ferris's subordinates told her that last night Roybal died because his throat was slit. At the same time, the Russian terrorists were transferring the nukes they were smuggling. They then discussed Chris, who was wanted by the FBI, and they then considered Chris as their threat. Their leader then ordered that they should catch and kill Chris. Meanwhile, Chris and Liz, who were on their way, stopped at a place because Liz had to teach the children there. Liz apparently was a very good teacher and really loved her students. After Liz finished teaching, they continued their journey. When it got dark, the road they were on was blocked by officials because it was dangerous. They were then advised to turn around and stay at a motel. Unbeknownst to them, Ferris and her men had apparently tracked them down. The next day, the FBI held another meeting and Ferris again suggested that they should use Chris to find out where the location of the nuke would be detonated. Shortly thereafter, Ferris and her men began to move in search of Chris. Across from the FBI headquarters there was a Russian terrorist, who was watching their movements and started following them in order to find Chris. Meanwhile, Chris and Liz were spending time together at the motel. Outside the motel, some distance away the FBI kept a close eye on Chris, while the Russian terrorists kept an eye on them all. Shortly thereafter, Liz came out of the motel and left. Ferris and his men then took her to the car and started talking to Liz. They then said that Chris was a psychopath who was on the run, so whatever he said to Liz was just a trick to escape. After hearing that, Liz became shocked. Ferris then told her to return to the motel and give Chris a drink that had been given sleeping pills. She also told Liz to put her sleeping pills in 2 minutes after Chris left the room. After that, Liz then came back and did exactly what Ferris said. When Chris came out of the bathroom, Liz then gave him a drink that had been given the sleeping pills. Chris then immediately tried to drink it, but Liz stopped him. Liz then whispered and told her that the FBI ordered her to do all that, but she didn't want Chris to die. After that, Chris then told Liz about his ability to see the future. Chris also informed that he could not help the FBI because he actually could not, because Chris could only see the future in which he was involved. However, if the future was related to Liz, Chris could see even further. After that, Chris told his plan to Liz before they separated. Chris also promised that he would find Liz. After saying that, Chris came out of the motel and jumped into the cliff to escape. The FBI who saw his act immediately moved and chased Chris. While trying to run, Chris instead saved Ferris, who was almost crushed by a piece of wood, so he was caught. Meanwhile, Liz did exactly what Chris told her to do, and left after doing it. When she left there, she was intercepted by Russian terrorists and was kidnapped. Chris, who was arrested, was now taken to the FBI headquarters and was locked in a room. Chris was tied up and his eyes were forced to stay open. Ferris forced him to keep watching the news and told Chris to look into future news showing a bomb explosion case, and asked Chris to tell her the location of the bomb. Chris, who couldn't fight back, could only surrender. He kept looking at the news, and managed to see the future related to the bomb. On the news, Liz was tied to a chair and the bomb that was attached to her body exploded. Upon seeing that, Chris panicked. He then begged Ferris to be released, and he promised to help her. After that, Ferris then took Chris out of there and Chris was sent to a detention room. After arriving there, Chris instead rebelled and ran away. Ferris and the other FBI agents then chased him. Chris kept running until he arrived at the place where Liz would die. Not long after, Ferris got there, and Chris then told what he saw. After that, Ferris invited Chris to work together, and she would help to track down Liz's kidnapper and also try to save her. Their initial plan was to trap the terrorist sniper on top of another building. Chris used his abilities so he didn't get shot, and they managed to catch the terrorist sniper. After that, Chris started concentrating to see the future when the terrorists who brought Liz arrived at that place. From there, Chris managed to see the license plate of the car they were using and immediately told Ferris. Ferris immediately contacted her men to find a car with that license plate. After that, Chris chaired the FBI meeting and told them to move according to his plan. Not long after, the terrorist car came and Chris immediately led the FBI agents to act while being protected by them. Meanwhile, Liz managed to survive and get out of the car. She then fled to a room and instead was caught again by terrorists. Go, go! Chris led the FBI agents to enter the enemy base, and thanks to his abilities, they managed to avoid many traps and also snipers. Shortly thereafter, they managed to find Liz and rescued her. Chris was very relieved that Liz was okay, but Ferris reminded him that their job was not done. Ferris informed that she had received information that the nuclear bomb had been moved and they must find its location. Ferris then brought Chris to view the satellite imagery on the laptop, and Chris immediately realized that something was wrong. He immediately said that he had made a mistake, and the bomb suddenly exploded. After that, Chris opened his eyes. Apparently, he was still in the motel room with Liz and had not moved from there at all. Everything he saw just now was just an image of the future he had managed to see. After that, he called Ferris and decided to help her, but with the condition that they would not get Liz involved. Chris then woke up Liz, who was still sleeping, and said goodbye to her. He also promised that he would find Liz.